14-year, $340 million contract extension.
Judge, the home run champ, making $40 million a year.
Baseball's newest $300 million man.
I want to show you how you can 30x your money with real estate, and I'm going to show you this by using one of my passions, Major League Baseball. For those of you that don't know, I'm not just a huge fan of real estate investing and Airbnbs, where I've been able to make most of my wealth, but I'm also a huge baseball fan. And if you also don't know, Nolan Ryan was the very first Major League Baseball pitcher to earn $1 million in 1 year.
And in the process became baseball's first $1 million man.
Now, during his time, he made over $25 million in his entire career, which I would take today. But back then, $25 million today is equal to right around $70 million. When you compare that to a player like Max Scherzer, who's literally going to make $70 million in the span of 2 years,
the Mets' $130 million man,
you kind of scratch your head and say, well, I thought inflation is supposed to make up for this. This doesn't make sense. Why is Max Scherzer making so much more money? That's not fair to Nolan Ryan. Well, what if I told you that if invested the right way in real estate, Nolan Ryan's salary is actually worth incredibly more than Max Scherzer's? Would you believe me?
Look at this.
Well, let me show you the proof. This is the perfect time to tell you that I'm also taking my passion for baseball into a passion project. It's called The Setup Man. This is my podcast that I'm starting on the side, interviewing Major League Baseball players, current and former, and having conversations with them that you can be a fly on the wall for. So make sure to go check it out, setupman.net, or we're also on Instagram at setupmanpod. Now, I need to make sure you understand there's one stipulation. I'm not saying Nolan Ryan did this. I'm saying had Nolan Ryan taken that $1 million plus the rest of his entire career earnings and done what I'm about to show you, then the results would be astronomical. So unfortunately, Nolan, you can't reverse the clock, and I'm sure you're doing just fine. But any of you out there, whether you're making $1 million a year or even just $100,000 a year, or maybe even less, can take this same idea and apply it to make sure that you're building wealth for the future. So let's break down the math if Nolan Ryan had taken that $25 million and invested a majority of it into real estate. Let's first assume a few things. Number one is that back then, taxes were a little bit lower. So let's assume that 25% of this $25 million went to taxes. So we're down to about $19, $20 million in overall net earnings after taxes. Now, if we do that for Nolan, we have to do that for Max as well. And today taxes are a lot more. So let's take 40% away from Max. So taking 40% out of $245 million for his entire career brings us to actually $147 million. Still not too shabby. Now, if Nolan were to take that $10 million and comparing apples to apples here, he invested into the stock market, the S&P 500. I just went ahead and asked Google, what would that $10 million be worth today? And the answer was right around $37 million, which is really great, right? That's why a lot of people like going to the stock market. It's passive, it's predictable. It's something that will grow your money, no doubt, as long as you stick with the ebbs and flows. But $37 million is still less than 1/4 of what Max is worth at $147 million. So still, it's just not adding up. So what if instead Nolan took all that money and put it into real estate? Now, that first $1 million deal that he signed was with the Houston Astros. So we're going to assume that he's going to buy all of his houses in Houston. In 1980, the median house was about $60,000. Crazy to think, right? Today, that same house is worth about $340,000. That means that if you spent $1 on a piece of real estate in 1980, it's now worth $5.50-ish. Take a look at this house right here. It kind of falls into that category. Nothing too special about it. It is worth right now right around $340,000, $350,000. It's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, and it has some minor updates. So this is the kind of house that we're talking about that Nolan would have bought back in 1980. Now, if he would have bought all of his houses in cash, no debt, no mortgages, he just straight up said, I'm going to put $60,000 at every single house that I buy, then he could have bought 166 homes with that $10 million. And today, since it would multiply by 5.5 times what it was worth back then, that means he would be making right about $55 million. That's what his net worth would now be with that $10 million. Still extremely under what Max Scherzer's $147 million is. So where are you getting at with this, Kyle? Well, there's still a few things that are very important that I'm leaving out. And the first two, I'm not even gonna factor in because I want you to see these as cherries on top after we do the real math. The first thing is he's not gonna just buy a house and let it sit there. He's gonna put a tenant in there, and he's probably gonna get a property manager, and it's gonna be passive for him, but he's gonna make this passive cash flow. Next is the tax advantages that he can use against his W-2 as a Major League Baseball player. Again, I'm not going to even factor these in. I want you to see this as excess income by the end. The biggest thing though that we're not factoring in is the debt. And that's where the magic of real estate happens. So instead of Nolan going out and buying each of these houses with cash at $60,000 each, let's assume he actually put 20% down as an investment loan on each one of these houses. So instead of paying $60,000 per house, he's paying $12,000 per house. So instead of buying 166 houses, he can actually buy as many as 833 houses with that $10 million. And let's also assume for a second that the tenants that he puts in these houses are only going to cover his costs, his debt, his taxes, his insurance, and all of the repairs throughout that 30 to 40 years that he's holding onto these properties. So he's making no cash flow essentially, but the tenant is paying down the debt instead of him. Well, that means that each of these houses is fully paid off with the tenant paying off the debt after 30 years since day one, which in this case means that all those houses that he bought would be paid off right around 2015 to 2020. Now, instead of 166 homes at $340,000, he owns 833 homes that are all paid off worth $340,000. If we do the math, 833 times 340,000, we get over $280 million. So he's pretty much doubled what Max's salary is worth, but wait, there's more. He's now cash flowing in these properties with zero debt. Let's assume after he pays taxes, insurance, and the repairs that he's keeping 70% of his rental income. Here's the perfect example of a house that would be rented in this area. We're looking at right around $1,700 per month. Again, pretty basic compared to the one that we looked at that we would be purchasing. And I would say this is a pretty good comp. If he's keeping 70% of that $1,725 per month, that means he's making $1,200 per house. $1,200 times 833, he is cash flowing over $1 million per month. That's $12 million per year. Would you take this investment? I'd take this all day long. All right, so let's summarize this, right? If Max Scherzer's $245 million after taxes is now worth $147 million and he never invests a single dollar in anything, then that value of that money is going down, down, and down because of inflation, and he's just hoping that he can survive off of that money. Meanwhile, Nolan Ryan's $25.7 million that he invested wisely, 40% of that income invested into real estate, and he was able to live off of the rest, that is now worth almost 30 times as much as it was from day one. $10 million has been turned into $283 million, plus he's cash flowing $12 million per year with all of the tenants in the properties. So do you still think that $1 million that Nolan Ryan was paid in 1980 is unfair compared to today's player? The key thing that you need to understand is you need to start investing now. So keep following all of our content right here on the Fearless Investor YouTube channel, where we're helping you to conquer the world of short-term rentals and real estate investing.